Hello and welcome to the show, Ben.
Well, thank you for having me, Alex. Appreciate that. And I love that intro music. Gets the groove going.
Absolutely. And one of the things I like to always ask my guests is what are your earliest memories of travel?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. So I actually have, for someone who hasn't traveled a lot lately, I have a lot of early memories of travel. We traveled a lot when I was a young kid. Sometimes actual like moving, traveling, and then a lot of times just exploring the world and going, living different places. So I would say the thing that sticks out the most to me about travel, especially at a young age, is the music that built the soundtrack of the travel. Like there are still certain songs that I haven't heard in years, 10, 20 years sometimes. And then when I hear it, it just brings me right back to being on the airplane or getting in the car. And that song really does kind of kick back.
Yeah, no, sound is a very important part that we I think we overlook. When we're exchanging ideas with people, we say, "Oh, first it's the words, then it's the visuals," but mostly it's what everything sounds like.
Yeah.
So, so what sort of journeys really stand out for you then when you have these memories?
I think the ones that stick out the most, while there is a vibe about the car travels and being here in the States, we do a ton of traveling across states and try to go see as much as we possibly can. But I think that the airline travel probably sticks out the most. There's a little bit of the fear of the unknown when you're a child. And then, of course, just the wow that goes along with every part of the process. So I would say the air travel really sticks out the most, especially when you're going on those long overseas flights, 9 hours, 11 hours. Those definitely bring back some pretty strong memories.
And any particular destinations?
Ooh, probably the one that sticks out the most is a couple travels actually we did to Malta. You probably know where it is, right? It's a tiny island in the Mediterranean, and you have to take a couple of flights to get there. And then when you're there, it's like you all of a sudden get to this whole new world that is pretty amazing, especially as a young child. I mean, like that was just really eye opening going from the States to the island of Malta.
Well, I think it's Malta where it's mentioned, but they, d- I have heard it say that they only drive in the shade on Malta.
I have not heard someone say that in a long time. What side of the right? I think there's a joke that goes along with that, right? So like in the States, we drive on the right side, and in the UK, drive on the left side. In Malta, they just drive where the shade is. Yeah, I have not heard that in a long time, Alex. That's pretty good. That's really good.
So you have your roots in Florida now, but you didn't grow up in Florida. So when you realized that you would be moving, did you kind of have a like a, an expectation of what the Florida lifestyle might be like?
Oh wow, yes. So huge. I thought you were going somewhere else with that, which I'll bring up. But yeah, huge expectation of the Florida lifestyle. And in fact, we picked Florida because both my wife and I, when we were children, before we met each other, we those memories of driving to Florida, whether it was the family summer vacation or a spring break trip, even as as young adults, just that feeling, the vibe that goes along with getting to Florida when you're leaving the big city. I grew up in Atlanta, and in fact, after living here now in Florida for 21 years, which is pretty wild to say out loud, we still try to bring that feeling back. So whenever you're going over a bridge, going from kind of the mainland of Florida over the intercoastal, or sometimes we call it over the ditch, and we get to the beach side of the state, there's just the smell, the feeling of the air. And we're used to it now because we do it so often and lived here so long. But every once in a while, it does still spark that memory of being a kid and leaving the city and finally getting through your 7-hour trip and arriving, where you can smell the ocean, hear the seagulls. That vibe is something that absolutely drew us to Florida.
And of course, one of the special things about the state is, well, it's actually, having read the stat, it's quite similar to the UK. Um, no one is ever more than about 60 miles from the coast.
That's a great point. I actually have not put two and two together on that because I just think of Florida as the place where where the coastline is, and then everywhere else in America is not. But it's great. That's a good point. Is that there are lots of other places where yes, you can. It's a short drive no matter which way you go.
Mm.
Love that.
So yeah, so I guess it's for the reasons you said. It's definitely had it affected how you viewed the world. So perhaps what happened was that once you arrived, you could never leave.
Florida specifically, or the coast,
Yeah,
or what do you mean?
yeah, yeah.
Oh, we talk about that as a family. So what's really funny is our kids all grew up in Florida, so they don't know any different, right? So they don't have those memories I was just talking about of leaving the city and smelling the beach for the first time. And so we joke around with them that they're a little bit spoiled when it comes to that. And when we do leave and travel with them and then come back, they sometimes they'll go, now I know what you're talking about, like that feeling and that smell, and they definitely miss it for sure.
Well, it's that experience of travel which changes your view of the world. Um,
Yeah.
I as a child, the first thing I always remember, because I could never articulate it as a young person, is just what something sounded like,
Mm-hmm.
what it smelt like. The food was different. Um, so I don't know if it's the same for you, but I valued my home place a little differently every time I went somewhere else.
Yeah, the coming back home that's a great point. Is you're anxious to get away from it, right? When you're planning a vacation or holiday, and then the coming back to it is just its own feeling of security, safety. You're here again. But the food part of it, though, I think it's an exciting part about travel, especially thinking of when you said that, thinking of going to Malta, because the food is definitely different there than what we're used to here in the States. And some things may be a little bit too exotic for me, but even as a kid, just really remembering some of the delicious food there is pretty cool.
Mm. So, would you say that you're unusual American, because it is said that not all Americans like leaving the US, but you you have. So, why? What was what was your motivation to sort of break the spell?
That's interesting. So as a child, my dad's work brought us all around the world. So we traveled because of his work. Sometimes it was just to go visit him if he was there for an extended amount of time. Sometimes it was together as a family. So I will say, though, it maybe depending on the circles that people run around in the States, that there is a little bit of a kind of a show off opportunity. Maybe it's a social media show off opportunity to leave the States, like bragging a little bit about, "Ooh, we went here, went there." I'll give you an example. So in Florida, where do you vacation if you're in Florida? So a lot of people might go to the mountains for that, but also just being in the Southeast region, we might go to the Caribbean as a long weekend getaway, right? So you might fly to Jamaica or Bahamas just for 2 days, 3 days. Whereas if you're leaving to go on a further distance, it's usually for a longer period of time. So you get to this point where even going to anywhere in the Caribbean, any of the islands in the Caribbean, is not even really a big deal. You don't get a chance to show off on your social media that we're in the Bahamas. People kind of roll their eyes to that. If you live in this region, it's a beautiful place, obviously, and great to go and visit. But when you say that you went to Paris, went to the UK, went to Sweden, there's a little bit of that envy you're trying to create in all your friends that follow you on social media. So I think there's some bragging rights to leaving the country that people like to exploit.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, I read that these days Florida uh, is increasingly a state where people want to come to stay permanently. I was reading that New Yorkers, in particularly, are a fan of Miami. I mean, don't they know that Miami's like Venice? What's your take on it?
But when you say like Venice, why, before I jump to any conclusions, why do you say that?
Well, Venice in Europe is meant to be sinking, and
Right. Okay. So we are, everyone who lives in Florida is in complete denial that that is happening, even though we see the storms and the this, that happens. When I say everyone, maybe the ones who haven't experienced it firsthand, there's still that draw that brings people to the coast, as we're watching some of the things change in terms of water levels and storms and flooding and that kind of thing. So I think people are ready to get out of the big city. There's lots of political benefits in Florida, certainly the geographical benefits of Florida as well. So I think people are ready to leave something behind in that big city, especially New York specifically, and come enjoy the high life here in Florida.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the weather. It's actually not. It's not typically that dramatic in the state, is it? People always say, "Oh, they've got it's windy or there's lots of thunderstorms," but it's probably no more than anywhere else.
So the thunderstorms are interesting because in the summertime they are a daily occurrence. They're typically around 3, 4 in the afternoon, and you just expect it. Like, you just know it's going to happen. So if you're out shopping and there's a big thunderstorm, you don't have an umbrella, you don't rush to your car, you just wait about 5 minutes, thunderstorm goes away, and you walk to your car like no problem. So you get used to those patterns for sure. I think Florida's motto is the Sunshine State. And speaking of travel, when I was a young kid, there's a picture that we have, a non-digital, a real picture in a photo album somewhere of my mom and me pulled over on the highway, standing in front of a big sign that says "Welcome to Florida, the Sunshine State," and it's pouring down, raining. So mom thought it would be clever to take a picture like Sunshine State, it's raining. So we have a picture of that. We still joke about that now. So the rain it's just part of it, and you just know that it's going to come and go in just a matter of minutes, but it's going to happen every day.
Yeah. And do you think, I'm sure it's not unique to Florida, but do you think a lot of travelers make assumptions about destinations, and therefore a lot of what I describe as hidden gems get overlooked? Do you find the crowds always going to certain places, and you think, well, why do they never go there? That's just as good.
It is interesting, like, what draws the crowd to certain places. And it's probably advertising dollars more than anything, right? So like, just really, whether it's gambling destinations or exotic places, just the attention that they get, and will probably draw the people there. One thing that's interesting too is a lot of times, kind of what you were talking about, is like the postcard. People still use postcards, I don't know, but the pictures on the website or on social media might highlight a specific area of a travel destination, and not highlight maybe some of the areas where you wouldn't want to go see, right? So there's a little bit of that bait and switch, I think, that you have in a lot of destinations. So that's a big part of it. If I could put a plug in for Hawaii, for those of you watching this show and thinking, we want to go to Hawaii, I've traveled a lot, especially as a young child. Hawaii is probably the only place I've been to that is better than the postcards or better than the websites show. Truly. In fact, I remember being on the road to Hana in Maui, and my wife and I were, we rented a car doing the road to Hana thing, this big tourist destination, and we come across this waterfall that looks like the waterfall that any of us have maybe seen from a Hawaii postcard or Hawaii website. And we just stop everything. There's the waterfall. Like, we have to go check this out and see it and whatever. And so we pull the car, we go to the waterfall, and we spend, a good 30, 45 minutes playing in the water. It's absolutely gorgeous. Get back in the car to go finish our plans for this specific day. And not even 5 minutes from there on the road, another waterfall, and then another waterfall, and then another waterfall. I mean, it was just, more beauty than any picture could ever take. And that was one of the things that really stuck out with us about Hawaii, was that better than any of the pictures that you've seen.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very diverse place, and I think sometimes that can be very much overlooked. You know, I think one
Yeah.
of the most I only had the privilege of going there once on a stopover, and the thing that uh, that really stuck out of my mind walking on Waikiki Beach was that the original hotel is still there, but the whole strip is now completely forward. And I was thinking, well, it wasn't like this when, I don't know if Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall ever sat on that beach, but they wouldn't have seen what I saw. Um, things. Do you think uh, there's over tourism now?
Oh, travel is so prevalent, and I have to say yes. So for example, I don't know if you've been to Paris. I have not been to Paris. We never made it to that destination yet. It's definitely part of the plan. But some of the stories that we hear from our friends that go, it's just wow, just commercialized, and sometimes pinpointed areas, but still commercialized. I remember some areas too, like the Madame Tussauds Museum when we were in London. It's just some of those things that are just like the tourist must dos that all the locals are like, oh my gosh, rolling their eyes, don't go there. And we see that too. So we're close to St. Augustine, big destination city. So you see that little strip of things to do for tourists and that kind of thing. But yeah, pictures that I've seen of Malta since it's been a couple decades since I've gone. The pictures I've seen there don't even recognize the places that we have in our picture when we compare to it. And so there's a lot of overdevelopment, and it's where the money is. It's what people it's what attracts people there, makes people want to go. So I think it's inevitable, but it can ruin the vibe in a lot of cases, especially for the locals.
Mm. Do you have any? Are you aware of any like sustainable uh, tourism? Because I
Hmm.
think that's kind of a direction that certain groups of people like to go in. Have you seen it? Do you think it could work?
So I'm familiar with it in terms of reading about it and people talking about it. I have not visited any of those types of destinations, and I think it can work. And I think there's a wholesomeness to it that makes the trip. It's a little bit different, right? Different purpose, different maybe objective or outcome that you're looking for from your holiday. But there is maybe a feeling of unplugged, a feeling of longevity, of doing some of these things, at least the way that I've read about it. And hopefully those will grow as well without becoming too commercialized, but those will grow as well because it's a necessary feeling and necessary experience for those, especially the ones that are plugged into the big cities that don't get a chance to really experience that.
Yeah, and of course the most interesting thing about travel, of course, is because we've experienced it over a great number of years, and of course, I wanted to ask about because you're in the education game. You do work at the North Florida uh, University, so you must come across a lot of young people who are probably both from Florida and out the state. Um, what do you think their travel experiences are like, and can we hand them on any um, tips or sort of things that they should be thinking about for the future?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, we get a lot of students from Europe that are studying at University of North Florida. So we get a chance to hear the stories and exchange stories. So we do see that, and then of course we do have an interesting mix of students that some have never left the area, and some that like to travel any chance they get. And I don't know if that comes from maybe lifestyle growing up or just the circle of friends that they spend the most time with. But I do see a lot of hot and cold. Some people who really want to travel and some who like just to stay put, especially in that age group. And maybe that'll change as they grow older. You hear great stories and stories from their travel experiences from the students. So it's interesting to see that mix and what their mindset is and how they approach travel.
Mm. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the whole travel game progresses. So, well, one of the things that you do is, in fact, that we have in common, Ben, is that we both like podcasting. Um, so maybe you could tell me what you and your colleagues podcast about. Be
Yeah,
good for the
yeah,
audience.
absolutely. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So we do a 6 time a year webinar series, and I'm glad that you mentioned that it's podcast because webinars sound boring, they're stuffing, and so we take this kind of dialogue approach on our webinars and make it a little more of a podcast and still very educational. So at Benchmark Training, we are focused on communication in the workplace. So whether it's leaders that are new to their role and developing the connectivity that they need to develop with their team, whether it's senior the leaders that are learning the younger workforce and trying to increase accountability, or even if it's sales teams that are trying to navigate how buyers are making purchases nowadays. So all of those topics are fair game on our webinar/podcast. In fact, we have one coming up. I even know when it is in a couple of days here. That's coming up on delegation anxiety and why so many leaders are tiptoeing around delegating to their team instead of embracing it and giving their team the opportunity to grow and develop as young professionals. So all kinds of topics there, but typically around communication and connectivity in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think podcasting is a very good way of getting information across, isn't it? And um, yeah, I'm already finding that I enjoy conversation an amazing amount.
Absolutely. Podcasts have grown tremendously over last 7 to 10 years. In fact, the interesting statistic, if it wasn't for podcasting, Spotify probably wouldn't be in business today. They were just bleeding all kinds of money from their music industry side. And it really was podcast actually that has been saving Spotify the last several years. So yeah, really big. And it's just a great way to be a fly in the wall in conversations like this one, get a different exposure to other people's frame of mind, their way they're thinking, their opinions, sometimes facts, those kind of things. Really powerful way just to absorb information while you're driving a car, while you're exercising, you're running, doing your own thing. So it's exposed, I think, a lot of us to different opinions and mindsets that we would not have otherwise been exposed to.
Yeah. Well, amazing. Well, um, I could talk to you about travel all day long, but sadly we have to wrap. And thank you very much, Ben, for joining me today. And yeah, have an amazing day.
Alex, thank you for having me on. Definitely a pleasure. And I've had a chance to work with you a little bit behind the scenes as well. So very professional. Definitely just a gift to be part of this and love the things you're doing in the travel world. More people need to hear these types of conversations and expose their mind to travel and different opinions, especially if they're helping others do the same thing or if they're traveling for themselves. So just after watching a lot of the content you have, just a lot of golden nuggets here, a lot of information for people who are in the travel mindset.
Thank you. All righty.
All
See
right,
you
until
again.
next time. Take care.
Okay. Bye bye.